Have you ever wanted to make a pleated skirt for your favorite fashion doll? Or maybe you've actually tried to do it, but you can't figure out why when you sew the pleats down, they become too tight at the doll's hips. One of my subscribers had that same question and she asked if I could do a video on how to create a pleated skirt for Ellowyne. By using the information in the video, you can create a pleated skirt for any size fashion doll you desire. Now I have to be honest, there were some challenges in constructing this pleated skirt, and if you stay with me until the end of the video, I'll give you my top 3 tips on ways to make this project a little less frustrating. Let's go ahead and get started. To get started with our skirt project, you're going to grab the doll that you want to sew for, your normal sewing implements, pins, scissors, and an iron. And in addition to that, you're going to want to grab some light cotton fabric, a heat erasable marker, and a thin measuring tape. Ellowyne Wilde is the doll that I'm making the skirt for, so I'm quickly going to get 3 measurements on the doll. Her waist, which is 5 inches, the widest portion of her hips, which I have calculated here at 7.5 inches, and then you're going to want to take into consideration the hip drop, which is the distance from her waist to where her hip is at the fullest point, and I've estimated that this is going to be about 1 inch. To get the width of the fabric, we're going to take the waist measurement with it, which in this case was 5 inches, and we're going to multiply it by 3, which is going to give us the full length of 15 inches. With that 15 inches, we also want to take into account seam allowance, which is going to be 1/4 inch at each side, which gives the width of our piece 15.5 inches. Next, you'll want to determine the length you want the skirt to be. From the natural waist, you'll measure down either to a mini, a midi, or even below the knees. And once you determine the length that you want the skirt to be, add 1/4 inch seam allowance to the bottom of the skirt. In this case, I've chosen 4.5 inches, which is going to give her just a little bit of a conservative mini skirt. This block represents the pattern piece so far cut on the fold. It's giving us a width of 15.5 inches, and I've chosen a length of 4.5 inches. Next, we need to determine how many pleats we want to add to the skirt. The more pleats you have, the narrower and skinnier your pleats are going to be. The less pleats you have, the chunkier and wider your pleat will be. With the chosen number of 10 pleats, we'll take Ellowyne's waist measurement, which is 5 inches, and divide it by the number of pleats, which is 10, and that will give us a 1/2 inch pleat width for the entire skirt. With our skirt piece cut out, we're going to go ahead and mark the placement for the pleats. For the demonstration, I'll be using a heat erasable marker and completely marking the pleat from the top to the bottom. I do encourage you to test your heat erasable marker on the fabric that you're using, just to make sure that it does actually disappear. With our skirt section cut out, the first thing you want to do is mark off the seam allowance at both the left and right back sides. After you have that accomplished, the next thing to do is make 1/2 inch lines all the way across the fabric to the very end to indicate where we're going to be placing the pleats. With the transparent grid, it's really easy to see that you're getting all of those lines equally distanced from each other because you can refer back to the previous 1/2 inch. With our lines drawn on, the next step is to actually form the pleats. What you want to do is you want to skip that first line, which is actually going to be the seam allowance as indicated on the left and right back side. You're going to start with that second line in, which will be considered line number 1. If you wanted to mark the pleats, you could go 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, all the way down to the end. And you want to bring line 1 to line 3 on every single pleat, with the second line being the actual fold line. I went ahead and cut out a piece equal to the fabric so that we can see how it looks when all the pleats are in the proper place. At this point, when the pleats are all pressed, you do want to grab your OmniGrid square and again verify that you have the right length. So if you recall from the beginning of the video, we said that Ellowyne's waist was 5 inches and then the seam allowance of 1/2 inch was added. Here's the seam allowance here, and as you can see, this would equal 5 inches if we do a really good job pleating. once you have all of the pleats pressed, you do want to confirm that you have the correct size. Go ahead and grab your measuring tape, confirm that you have the right measurement for the waist plus the seam allowances, and then for the next step, we'll just go ahead and run a base stitch to secure the pleats at the top. We have all our folded pleats basted in place, and now I'm going to run a zigzag stitch along the left and right back opening. Before we're able to do the top stitching on the skirt, we do have to take into account the adjustment for the hip width. As we noted at the beginning, Ellowyne's hips are 7.5 inches and her waist is 5. At this point, you're going to take that waist measurement, subtract it from the hips, and you end up with 2.5 inches. Then we divide that number by the number of pleats we have, which gives us a 1/4 inch adjustment at each pleat. You're going to want to mark the hip drop from the waist edge, which in this case is 1 inch. Just to be on the safe side, you can grab your doll, wrap the skirt around her, and verify that when the center back seam is sewn, it will cover her bum. Once you confirm that the skirt will actually fit with the placement of the pins, you can go ahead and do that top stitching. You'll start from the waist edge, take it all the way down to the hip drop line, and back stitch there to secure. You'll repeat that on every seam go pleat until you get to the other side. With our pleats top stitch, we're going to go ahead and take it over to the ironing board, trim all the extra strings, iron out that heat erasable marker that indicated the hip drop, double check it to the doll, and then we'll get the skirt hemmed and start the waistband. My preferred method in hemming this skirt is to run a zigzag stitch along the hem edge and then to turn that zigzag stitch up about 1/8 of an inch to make a nice narrow hem. If you made it this far, we're almost finished. Our last couple of steps are going to be to add the waistband, sew the center back seam, and add a snap to the back closure. So what I've done is I've cut a waistband 0.85 inches by the length of the actual skirt, which is 5.5 inches, and I just want to confirm that that's going to fit before I actually sew it together. I'm going to run a zigzag stitch along one of the long edges, and then I'm going to place it right sides together and sew across the waist edge. Let's take that over to the ironing board and press the waistband up. We're going to fold the left back opening under 1/4 of an inch, matching it up to that finished pleat. We're going to fold the rest of the waistband to the inside and give it a press. You can hand tack the waistband to the inside of the skirt, or if you prefer, you can sew right along this seam and sew in the ditch to create an invisible seam that will hold the waistband in place. The last step before adding the snap is to sew the center back seam from the hem edge to the dot as indicated on the pattern. We'll get our skirt turned right side out, fit it to the doll, and get that snap sewn in place. To finish the raw edge of the waistband on the right back side, I did add a little bit of fray check, but you can also just run your zigzag stitch right off the top of the waistband to finish that as well. Now that we have our snap installed and in place, let's go ahead and grab our doll and get those final photographs of our pleated skirt. Well, as you can see, eventually we had some success. There are a few things that I learned along the way that I think would be good, helpful tips for you as you go forward to make your own pleated skirt. Tip number 1 is to measure accurately. When you're dealing with the small doll scale, it can be really easy to move things a 1/16 of an inch, a 32nd of an inch, but when you do that 10 times, it can really throw off the final pleating of the skirt. The OmniGrid square that I used to measure those pleats was a lifesaver. The second recommendation is that you add a little bit of ease to the pattern. In this case, I'd recommend that you add maybe 1/4 of an inch to the overall measurements of the doll to accommodate any adjustments that you may need in the fit. My final recommendation is that you add a little bit larger seam allowance to the back of the skirt. This will accommodate the fact that your doll may decide to wear a leotard or blouse underneath her skirt. Thank you guys for your time and for watching. If you have any questions, you know where to post them. Please hit that like and subscribe button, and I'll see you in the next video.